Model trains have been popular ever since the 1950s and have grown on the culture of America. And the scenic structure has brought life to these downscaled trains through an interesting art form and hobby known as model railroading. Model railroading can be a tedious and time-consuming process, though going through the steps correctly can rewardingly reflect on the creativity and attention to detail of the hobbyist. First, start by brainstorming ideas and creating a rough drawing of the model railroad on paper. Once done with this, place the tracks on the base foam in the configuration you want according to the rough drawings made on paper. Second, after placing tracks, you will need to trace on the outside of the tracks to keep the position just in case if it shifts around. Next, you will place painter's tape on top of all the tracks to protect the rails for placing scenery in the next steps. Third step is creating the outside details for the layout, which involves mountains and hills. For making mountains and hills for the layout, there are two methods of doing this. One is creating the hills and mountains out of newspaper and plaster cloth. To do this, you need to make the outside walls of the mountains by cutting cardboard to shape. Then you will glue these to the outside portions of the layout to act as a built-in wall for filler. Next, use newspaper to fill in the inside of the hill or mountain of your choice, and lastly, using the plaster cloth by putting in water to soften and placing on top of the newspaper, overlapping each piece to cover all the newspaper. Then leave to dry. For the second method, foam can be used for the main formation of the hills or mountains. To do this, take each piece of foam and cut it to shape for the base. Then cut the second piece of the foam a bit smaller than the first. Once you have made a certain amount of layers, at least 4, glue each on top from largest to smallest. Then use a hot wire cutter to smooth out the edges of the hills by cutting the 90-degree points until flush with each level. Fourth, after making hills and mountains, the layout will need adhesive for the grass to adhere to. Use house paint to cover the whole layout for the grass turf that will go over. Once you have covered the whole layout with paint, including the hills and mountains, place the grass turf over the paint while it is still wet. Fifth, place different colors of grass turf to the wet paint to add realism to the layout, and use scenic cement to hold the different colors in place. Sixth, place trees, field grass, and bushes to the layout to add realism. Then use scenic glue to hold the different details in place. For the trees, drill a hole and then place glue inside and press on top. For the field grass, do the same and press in place. For the bushes, lay down glue and then place on top. 7. Take the tape off all the tracks to prepare for replacing ballast to the track. Once done taking tape off the tracks, use the ballast and place it over all the tracks and move it in place with a brush to fit the shape. Lastly, hold in place with scenic cement. 8th, for creating rock faces, make a plaster mix to use for pouring into the mold for creating the rock formations. Once done pouring into the rubber rock mold, make sure it is level and leave it to dry. Finally, take the rocks out of the mold and place them on the layout to the sides of the hills or mountains by using super glue or by using more plaster to adhere to the sides. Then paint the rocks with a black wash for the base color and paint the rest of the rocks with alternating colors by blotching in different areas. Once done with painting the main parts of the rock, use more plaster to fill in the seams on the sides of the rock faces. This is done to make sure the rocks don't look unnatural compared with real rock formations. When you are complete with filling in the seams, continue the same painting process to paint the plaster filling on all the rocks. 9th, use a scraper for scraping away the grass turf to shape according to the scale for making the roads. Then once done with scraping the certain areas, use black paint to fill in the portions with no grass turf. 10th, for the last step of creating the model railroad, place pre-made buildings near the roads for creating a town, or you can make buildings through hobby building kits. You can also make your own custom buildings by using thin, flat cardboard to make a structure that does not exist on the market.